I want you to think about the two things you absolutely rely on every single day.
Right, from the very second you wake up.
Exactly. But, you only ever actually notice them when they stop working. Like, you walk into a room, you flip a light switch,
Mhm.
you walk into the kitchen, you turn on the tap, and when the light comes on and the water flows, I mean, they're entirely invisible to your daily routine.
Oh, completely. We just take them for granted.
Yeah. But the second you flip that switch and there's just like a click in the dark, or you turn that tap and hear that hollow sputtering sound,
The worst sound.
it really is. Suddenly, those systems are literally the only things that matter in the entire world.
Well, it is the ultimate paradox of modern infrastructure, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
we engineer these massive, mind-bogglingly complex physical networks specifically so that society can, completely ignore them.
Right.
And because they live in the background,
Uh-huh.
we rarely understand the actual economic and physical friction happening right behind the drywall or beneath the pavement.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We are exploring a really highly detailed, deeply technical body of research on the public utility sector. So specifically, we're dissecting electricity and basic sanitation in Brazil.
Yeah, it's a fantastic data set.
It is. And this analysis comes directly from the Macroeconomy IA channel. And it is completely fresh off the presses, dated today, July 14th, 2026.
The scope of this research is just, it's remarkable. It synthesizes current market data, regulatory filings from agencies like NEL, the Ministry of Cities, and peer-reviewed academic literature, all to map out exactly where these fundamental utilities stand right now.
And what emerges from all this data is, well, it's a fascinating split screen. We're going to unpack how one of these sectors, electricity, is leaping into this futuristic, highly optimized green reality.
While the other one is, frankly, struggling.
Right. Sanitation is quite literally still fighting to catch up to the most basic of human needs. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand this massive gap between our power grid and our water pipes today, we actually have to rewind the clock a bit. Look at the environments where they were born.
Yeah, because the physical and economic realities of how these systems were originally deployed, they still dictate how they operate centuries later.
Exactly. So let's start with electricity. Its rise was rapid and, honestly, pretty glamorous.
Very glamorous.
Right. You have Thomas Edison firing up the Pearl Street Station in New York in 1882, proving centralized power generation was totally viable. But even before that, right here in Brazil, Dom Pedro II had already given Edison the green light to bring public electric lighting to the country in 1879.
Which was huge.
It really was.
Yeah.
It represented the absolute cutting edge of human progress, and the momentum was just, immediate.
And that momentum hasn't stopped. I mean, the data
Yeah.
from this July 2026 release maps out just how far the Brazilian power grid has evolved. It is a true global heavyweight.
Oh, for sure.
By 2025, Brazil's total installed capacity grew by 10.4% in a single year to reach 261 gigawatts. But the truly staggering metric here, it isn't the scale, it's the composition.
Right.
As of the most recent data, 89% of Brazil's electricity matrix is renewable.
Wait, 89%?
89%.
I mean, when you place that number in a global context, it almost looks like a typo in the report.
It genuinely does. The research actually cites 2024 data from Member Energy to provide that exact global context. And the worldwide average for renewable electricity, it sits at just 32%.
Wow. Just 32.
Yeah. Coal remains the single biggest global source at 34%. Even a country like Canada, which, is widely recognized for having a remarkably clean grid, they're sitting down at 66%.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Brazil's operating at nearly 90%.
That is just wild. So, okay, we have this gleaming, rapidly expanding, heavily renewable power grid, but then we pan the camera over to the water pipes.
Right, totally different story.
Completely. And the history of sanitation goes way back. We're talking ancient Babylon in 37 to 50 BC, complex drainage networks in Assyria, the famous Roman aqueducts. And in Brazil, the Rio Carioca Aqueduct project kicked off way back in 1620. You would assume that with a multi-thousand-year head start on electricity, our water systems would be structurally flawless by now.
You'd think so, but the reality is starkly different. Looking at the official 2023 data from the National Information System on Sanitation, or SANISA, the numbers are really sobering.
Yeah, they are.
17% of the Brazilian population still lacks access to running water. And regarding sewage collection, a massive 40% of the population lives without it entirely.
40%. Wow. I've been thinking about the mechanism behind this disconnect, and honestly, it feels like comparing the development of the smartphone to the building of a medieval cathedral.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Right. Because electricity, like the smartphone, it evolved at lightning speed because it instantly attracted massive private cash. You string wires up on poles, you immediately sell the power to end users, and you scale quickly. The returns were visible and fast.
Fast returns, exactly.
But water and sewage, that's the cathedral. It requires heavy, disruptive, long-term public infrastructure. You're digging up established streets, laying massive concrete pipes underground. It's expensive, it's entirely invisible, and historically, it just didn't generate those rapid financial returns.
What's fascinating here is how universally accurate that capital deployment analogy really is. Because historically, the entire world treated water and sewage almost exclusively as a public municipal burden.
Right, like it was just the town's problem.
Exactly. It functioned as a natural monopoly with an incredibly long investment maturation period. Because it was left to local governments, it systematically lacked the capital injection and the technological leaps that private investment brought to the electrical grid in the late 19th and 20th centuries.
Which makes a lot of sense.
And the research notes this is a global phenomenon. According to 2025 UN and WHO data, 3.4 billion people worldwide still lack access to safe sanitation.
3.4 billion, that is just wow. Which brings us to how both of these sectors are attempting to solve their respective growth bottlenecks today.
Yes.
And the primary mechanism, and certainly the most hotly debated one, is privatization. But again, these sectors are operating on vastly different historical timelines here.
Very different. The electricity sector began its structural shift toward privatization way back in the 1990s. We saw the creation of regulatory frameworks and agencies to manage this, and major state distributors were auctioned off to private groups.
Right, setting the stage.
Yeah. And this multi-decade arc culminated recently with the capitalization and privatization of Electrobras in 2022.
And the financials on that Electrobras deal are massive. The capitalization moved approximately 96.6 billion reais.
A huge sum.
Massive. Now, looking strictly at the mechanics and the market data here without taking any ideological stance, of course, the research maps out the immediate aftermath. In the first quarter of 2022, right after this shift, Electrobras saw its net revenue jump to 9.1 billion reais. That's a 12% increase from the previous year, along with significant profit bumps.
But the analysis is very careful to impartially present the friction points that came with those financial metrics, too.
Right, it wasn't all smooth sailing.
No, not at all. Union voices and institutional critics, they argue that the capital investments promised during the privatization phase, they haven't really materialized at the anticipated speed or scale. Furthermore, there is this ongoing debate that this model has structurally increased the tariffs passed down to the consumer. It has a highly complex legacy that the market is still actively pricing in.
And it is so crucial we report both sides of that dynamic purely as they exist in the market research. We aren't endorsing any view, just laying out what the sources say. So that's electricity, a mature, decades-long privatization process. Sanitation, on the other hand, it's just now entering its explosive growth phase.
Yeah, sanitation is currently undergoing the aggressive transformation that electricity experienced 30 years ago. The defining catalyst was the new legal framework for sanitation, which passed in 2020.
Okay, and what did that change exactly?
Well, it fundamentally changed the economic incentives. Instead of letting municipalities handle contracts individually, which often resulted in private companies, cherry-picking only the wealthy, profitable cities.
Of course, leaving the poorer towns behind.
Exactly. The new framework pushed for regionalization blocks. It groups profitable and unprofitable municipalities together, incentivizing private competition to take on the whole block. And it comes with a strict legal mandate: achieve universal access to water and sewage by 2033.
And the market reaction was basically instantaneous, right? I mean, the data indicates that private municipal operations skyrocketed from covering just 5% of municipalities in 2020 to about 30% by 2025 and 2026.
It's a massive jump.
Yeah, and we are currently looking at 28 auction projects being structured right now, which are projected to pull in 91 billion reais in investments.
And we also have empirical data on how this structural shift is actually performing on the ground. The research highlights a 2023 study by the Institute for Applied Economic Research, or IPEA, which tracked the impact of these new private operators.
Okay, what did they find?
The study found that privatization was associated with a 6.1 percentage point increase in access to sewage collection. Crucially, the mechanism of those regionalization blocks, it worked. The most disadvantaged municipalities saw the largest proportional benefits, which directly impacted regional inequality.
That's great news. But, I mean, anytime you inject massive private capital to accelerate infrastructure, there's a corresponding cost to the end user, right?
That is the inevitable economic trade-off. Subsequent peer-reviewed studies confirm the gains in access, but they clearly document that these gains come at the cost of higher consumer tariffs. You get more pipes in the ground, and you connect marginalized communities to the grid faster, but the monthly cost to maintain that private capital return increases.
It's always a trade-off, and this perfectly sets up what the research calls a global paradox. Because right as Brazil is aggressively utilizing private capital to hit that 2033 universalization goal, the developed world seems to be aggressively reversing course.
Yes, it is a remarkable divergence in public policy. Global data from the mid-2000s onward shows a massive wave of over 235 cases of remunicipalization.
Remunicipalization, so taking it back from private hands.
Exactly, taking it back under public control. And this is occurring heavily in developed regions like the United States and France. Paris, most notably, let its private water concessions expire in 2008 and brought the entire system back under direct public control. They cited dissatisfaction with private investment levels and ballooning tariffs.
Which, on the surface, feels counterintuitive. Like, why would cities that already have perfect infrastructure pull the plug on the companies running them?
If we connect this to the broader economic life cycle of infrastructure, it all really comes down to the stage of development. Brazil is fundamentally in the capex phase, capital expenditure. We have tens of millions of citizens who need heavy infrastructure built from scratch.
Right. Digging the trenches, laying the pipes.
Exactly. That requires a massive immediate injection of capital that municipal governments simply do not have, which the private sector is currently providing. Developed nations, however, they already have universal coverage. They are out of the capex phase and are strictly in the opex phase operational expenditure.
Ah, I see.
They aren't building a new system, they just want to maintain the old one cheaply. The economic incentives and the friction points change entirely once the concrete is already in the ground.
That makes total sense. So regardless of whether a public entity or a private conglomerate is managing the grid, they both eventually hit a hard physical reality. They both face leaks, and I mean literal physical leaks. The numbers in this July 2026 release regarding systemic losses are just staggering.
They really are. Let's examine electricity first. In 2025, the Brazilian grid lost 14.3% of its total generated power before it ever reached the meter.
14.3%, that is a massive chunk of generation just vanishing into thin air.
It breaks down into two distinct categories, though. Roughly half of that, about 45.2 terawatt hours, is classified as technical losses. This is purely the thermodynamics of moving electricity over massive geographic distances.
Oh, like heat loss.
Exactly. As alternating current travels hundreds of miles down transmission lines, a percentage of that energy naturally dissipates into the surrounding air as heat.
Okay, the physics makes sense. You lose heat over hundreds of miles of wire. But wait, that leaves another 45 terawatt hours unaccounted for. That is way too massive to just be faulty wiring. Are we looking at structural grid failures, or is this human interference?
It is overwhelmingly human interference. That second half represents non-technical losses. In practical terms, these are clandestine taps into the grid, commonly known as gatos, alongside organized fraud and systemic billing theft.
Unbelievable.
It's a complex socioeconomic issue as much as an engineering one. It's driven by both organized crime and deep systemic poverty. When you quantify both the physical heat loss and the theft, the financial cost of this lost energy in 2025 was an estimated 23.2 billion raises.
23 billion rays a year just evaporating or being siphoned off.
Yep.
And yet the physics of the sanitation sector somehow presents an even bleaker picture. The data shows sanitation loses roughly 40% of its water and distribution.
It's incredibly high.
It's absurd. I mean, imagine trying to fill up a bathtub with the drain wide open. That's what investing in this grid feels like. You are spending money to chemically purify and pump treated water, and 40% of it just seeps into the dirt before it ever reaches a faucet.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the strategic risk facing the sector. If you are hemorrhaging 40% of your product in transit, and you're dealing with severe regulatory fragmentation across thousands of individual municipalities, hitting that 2033 universalization goal becomes mathematically and physically near impossible.
You're just fighting a losing battle.
Exactly. It requires a drastic systemic overhaul of the physical infrastructure itself, not just a change in who owns the holding company.
Right. And while electricity doesn't have the exact same physical pipe problem, its own strategic risks are accelerating rapidly. Even with an 89% renewable matrix, the grid is not invincible.
No, the existential risk for the power grid is the explosive demand shock on the horizon. We're entering an era dominated by massive artificial intelligence data centers that require unprecedented amounts of uninterrupted power to cool their servers.
Yeah, AI needs a ton of juice.
Combine that with the global push toward the electrification of transport and EVs. This massive wave of new demand is going to hit a grid that relies overwhelmingly on hydroelectric power for its baseload.
And given that our baseload is heavily hydro-dependent, our grid's Achilles heel is directly tied to hydrological cycles, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if the reservoirs dip due to climate change-induced droughts or volatility, that 89% renewable matrix suddenly becomes our biggest liability.
This raises an important question about how we even measure and respond to these risks, which brings us to a major meta problem identified in the analysis: data governance.
Oh, the data itself is an issue.
A huge issue. For electricity, the regulatory data from NEL is near real time. We know exactly what generation capacity we have, and we can model demand spikes accurately month to month. But for sanitation, the official government data system, SANISA, operates with a structural 2-year lag.
Wait, 2 years.
2 years. The most recent official public data available in this July 2026 release is from the year-based 2023, which was only published in March of 2025.
That is wild. You are attempting to coordinate tens of billions of rays to hit a legally mandated infrastructure goal by 2033, and regulators are basically driving the car while looking in a rearview mirror that is 2 years behind.
And the fog of data gets thicker, too. The research maps out how different official sources couldn't even agree on the total capital invested in sanitation for 2023.
Are you serious?
Yes. If you look at the Ministry of Cities releases or data from the Private Operators Association, ABCON, versus reports from regional development banks like ETN and BNB, the numbers fluctuate wildly. They range from 24.7 billion to 29 billion rays.
So nobody actually knows.
Exactly. That is a multi-billion real discrepancy regarding how much money was actually injected into the ground. It highlights just how murky the administrative realities of public utilities can be.
Wow. So why does all this matter to you listening right now? Because these aren't just abstract economic theories or invisible pipes hidden behind your walls. The mechanics of these systems dictate your monthly bills. They determine whether a massive public policy, like the sweeping 2025 Social Tariff Lay 15.235, which targets a 100% discount on electricity for low-income consumption and affects 17.1 million families. They determine whether that legislation actually functions as intended or just shifts the heavy financial burden onto the middle class.
The stakes are incredibly high.
They are. Ultimately, the health of these underlying utilities sets the absolute ceiling for how much our tech-driven economy can grow. You cannot run an AI revolution on a grid that can't handle the load, and you certainly can't build a modern, equitable society when 40% of the population's waste isn't safely collected.
I think there's one final larger implication to consider here, is something to ponder. We spend so much time debating who should manage these massive centralized grids, the government or private corporations. But as our incredibly clean 89% renewable grid faces the massive power-hungry rise of artificial intelligence and electric vehicles over the next decade, we have to ask, will this surge in demand force us to fall back on the fossil fuels we've worked so hard to leave behind?
Oh, that's a scary thought.
Or will it be the catalyst that pushes us to a 100% green future? Maybe we'll even move toward a future where the very concept of a centralized utility becomes obsolete, shifting to hyper-localized, decentralized neighborhood microgrids, completely bypassing the massive leaky infrastructure we've spent the last century building.
Man, that is an entirely different paradigm and definitely something to mull over as this technology scales. Now, before we wrap up, we absolutely must state that this deep dive is purely informational and educational. It compiles data, regulatory filings, and market analysis from public sources. It does not express ideological bias and absolutely does not constitute investment, financial, legal, or tax advice. Economic projections change frequently, and past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Always consult a qualified professional before making any financial or strategic decisions.
And if you want to continue exploring the complex underlying mechanics connecting macroeconomics, artificial intelligence, and technology, you need to follow the Macroeconomy IA channel. It is an exceptional resource for exactly this kind of rigorous, data-driven insight.
Absolutely. Make sure to access the links in the show notes, follow the Macroeconomy IA channel, and stay tuned for the new publications. Because the next time you blindly flip that light switch or turn on the tap, well, you might just find yourself thinking about the billions of REA, the centuries of infrastructure, and the massive economic machinery required just to make that tiny, simple click happen.